Hello and welcome back to Project No Buy. Today's a little story about how cheap bedroom decor gave me another perspective as to how bad the sweatshop situation really is. So a lot of this concept is going under the assumption that having decent jobs or more fulfilling jobs can make our experience of life better. So if you're with me on that, then perhaps you'll agree with me on some of these ideas. I spoke about this a while ago where we had a $100 gift card to Amazon for switching internet providers. Incidentally, we've been without internet for 3 or 4 days at this point, and I actually don't know if it's caused a disruption in my YouTube schedule, so remains to be seen. But anyway, we received a gift card and we purchased some bedroom decor for one of my kids. And like I said, I think I shared vaguely about this when it happened. It might have been in April. And it wasn't totally relevant since I don't really talk about things that aren't purchased for me. And this no buy is not really extending to other people in my life whose needs and wants and money, spending money I don't control. Anyway, so regardless of your stance on whether bedroom decor is necessary or reasonable, we got a wall hanging, a picture for one of my kids' rooms. And observing the quality of this product, and again, it's not really about the product itself. There's any number of products that this applies to, but this was the product that was in my own hands at the time, and I was observing it, and it's still perfectly fine for the purpose. I hope we can ensure that it has longevity through the method we chose to display it, and the intention is to keep it as long as it's suitable to be hung on the wall and kept. So this is not about the specific item. But the aspects of the item that I was noticing was poor quality fabric and poor quality stitching. And it's natural to be annoyed at these features of a product like this that we spent our own money on, or in this case, it was a gift card. But when we buy products like this, we might tend to get upset about the quality issues of these products. But my new perspectives, the things that I've been learning, directed me to turn my anger or discontent at the flaws in this product to the factory conditions rather than the quality of the product itself or the people who make and sell the product. Maybe the people who sell the product should receive some of our wrath for these kinds of quality issues, but today's focus at least is on the people in the factories and how the usage of this kind of labor is just asking for cutting corners and low quality work. So the nature of sweatshop labor or factory labor in countries where the cost of labor is too low for what it should be, is that they are working with materials that are provided for them. And I had never really thought this through until handling this particular Amazon wall hanging. And so that's why I thought I should make a video about it, in case it's the same for any of you out there who may or may not have looked at it this way. But looking at it this way really changed my outlook. And so here we are. I was contemplating how the person who sewed this piece of fabric did not choose the fabric. They didn't choose the product. They didn't have a vision. And they were also probably being held to standards of completing a certain number in a day. And so, of course, the stitch work is going to be optimized for speed and not quality. Of course, the fabric is going to be of flimsy quality. The person doing the work to finish the product had no part in the beginning of the product and are not attached to any kind of brand or company. I don't know who sewed the garment. I don't even know what company I could call in terms of who is the maker of this thing. And, if you contemplate a piece of clothing from Shein or Temu, the same applies. Even branded brands, although they do have more of a public kind of presence and persona just on the basis of being a brand. So if I get a Lululemon shirt that's bad quality, I can tag Lululemon on social media and get them in hot water, get some public outrage going or something like that, and force them to take accountability. But for something like the Amazon wall hanging, because Amazon is such a massive company with so many brands working under them, it's not really possible to have any accountability for the quality and by extension, the conditions of the people making these products. Because again, I do believe that if somebody is fulfilled by the job they're doing, or at the very least compensated fairly, or at a level that they believe is fair, then they will be motivated to do better work. And again, this is not a question of, oh, we should pay them just enough that they think it's fair, so they're motivated to do better, and it's on them, right? I'm not trying to suggest that people working in sweatshops should be fulfilled and do better work. Like, this is not an argument from that angle. It's an observation from the other side of, it's no wonder that these products kind of get a free pass from any kind of quality control, because the people at the top dictating every step of the process are not interested in having a high quality product. They're interested in making more sales and will do anything that they can get away with in order to meet the minimum expectation for their customers. So again, the narrative that I kind of grew up with as a child from some people, again, not everybody, but some people that I interacted with would often comment on Chinese-made goods being cheap and low quality. And I personally have grown to learn that this is often not the case. In fact, China is not as cheap for labor as some other countries. And so if something is made in China, it might actually be more likely to be higher quality or have a higher quality standard. And again, the books that I read about fashion suggested that China was the place for more complicated sewing work, and other countries like Bangladesh were more suitable for basics with lower skill requirements. And again, I don't like to suggest that the laborers themselves have lower skills, but this is just going off of the evidence presented in the books that I was reading. So again, the implication is not about the people themselves, it's just about the markets within which they operate in each of those countries. As an American consumer, as a child, maybe I wasn't the direct consumer, I was hearing this narrative of cheap Chinese goods being kind of a negative thing, and it was very removed from the upper layers of demand and the people basically setting the conditions for the goods made in China. We would blame, in some ways, the Chinese factories themselves, the Chinese people, the culture almost. It was kind of not, I mean, it was racist. I'm just gonna say it. And it wasn't necessarily the fault of the people saying this, because again, this was a cultivated view. But to assume that things from China were cheap and poor quality was basically propaganda that people who were setting the conditions for these Chinese factories leaned into and used to absolve themselves from responsibility for products that they sold and they made the profit off of. And so again, putting myself into the shoes of the person who sewed this cheap Amazon wall hanging, it would be so frustrating to be in that job and have no control over anything that you did. And I guess my closest parallel is working in fast food in my college years and not having control over the product. Sometimes I did work in the assembly line where I made salads for Panera, for context. And that was actually a lot more fun than working the register, just selling them and interacting with customers. But anyway, people in these factories are given this fabric, are given these instructions, are given these quotas to meet, and that's their only ability to contribute in their job. And none of it is controlled by them except perhaps, I mean, I can't even say that the quality of sewing is dictated by them, because they're under quotas that force a certain level of speed, and they're going to do what they have to do to meet the expectations of their job and keep their job. They're not given the time to do a good job, in other words. They're not incentivized to take pride in their work, which is not something, again, I'm not trying to have this flipped around on me and say that they should take pride in their work no matter what the conditions, because that's not reasonable. That's not what I'm trying to say here. They should be given working conditions in which they have the ability to feel proud of the labor they do, in other words. There's obviously a balance to be found here, right? There is some element of an average life that involves choosing a job and working at it, and an attitude adjustment can make the difference between whether we're happy or not. And I speak again from a Western experience or a North American experience at the moment, and as somebody who's very lucky to be in a field that doesn't necessarily match up with a normal expectation for labor, for jobs. And so I understand that I speak from outside of the realms of normal, even in my own country, in my own context. And so again, I don't wish to be projecting things that aren't representative of the real experience, and I'll try to avoid doing so. But I do believe that in general, regardless of the situation, we could be going to the dentist or something that's kind of not work-related, but possibly unpleasant, if we can shift our attitudes into treating something like a dental checkup as positive self-care, rather than something we dread and have anxiety about, whether or not we can control elements of anxiety. This is not a statement about that. But if we can try to reframe our attitudes, we can reframe our response. We can be happier about having to do certain things. My argument here, or my realization here as I was holding on to that cheap piece of fabric, is that these people making these goods in these factories have all of the odds stacked against them being able to be happy doing what they're doing. We have made it impossible as a capitalistic society for people to be fulfilled in jobs like this, because they're not only being given any possibility of doing work that they're proud of. Some of these laborers might actually really enjoy sewing. Some of these people sewing these goods. But even something that they enjoy doing under those conditions is going to become intolerable or horrible, or, imagine yourself in that position where you're forced to cut corners in your work to meet exterior goals that aren't conducive. They don't make you any more money. You don't see any of the payouts for your own labor. And it really just emphasizes how unacceptable this model of business really is. And again, I know I'm in hot water myself because I purchased that Amazon wall hanging. I participated in the cycle that demands that to continue, the factory labor, the conditions that make these jobs terrible. And again, it's not that I can change the past or my years of unconscious consumerism and pay penance necessarily for what I have done or how I used to behave and what I used to believe. The point here is that we need societal change. We need a change in attitude of consumer culture. And it's not that we need to feel guilty for what we've been doing or what we're even continuing to do, as long as we're trying to distance ourselves from these behaviors, as long as we're trying to change, as long as we see the impact of our actions, or can open up ourselves to be curious about it and want to have better, want to demand better, want to start living a better life and enabling others to live a better life. And so that's why I share this story today. That's why I share this kind of little thought exercise and kind of emotional response examination of when we receive something poor quality, did we kind of deserve it? And by we, I don't mean you as the consumer of that thing, but our society being set up the way it is kind of makes it inevitable in some ways. And I don't know that we've been taught to blame the right source for when these things happen, instead of blaming the cheap Chinese goods hopefully people out there aren't saying that anymore or aren't seriously using that as the source of their ire when they receive something subpar. Hopefully we're not blaming the things that actually don't really have the most effect, the sources that don't dictate the conditions for these products. Hopefully enough of us are starting to see that this is a problem that's been allowed to continue, that's been encouraged to continue by the systems in place and not in place. And again, my final thought of the day, I guess, that I'll leave you with is that even if we don't have it in our power to enact systemic change, this is still kind of the heart of Project No Buy, where we can have these feelings and these realizations and these, I guess, personal developments in a way, and make the choice to not buy things we don't need. And in some ways, that is the easiest way to demonstrate our activism. And in some ways, it's the hardest because it involves a personal excavation of things that we once thought we needed, and a personal examination of all the ways that we have acted out of line with our own values. Anyway, with that, I will leave you for today, and I look forward to reading your thoughts about this one. Feel free to share anything you would like to share. Feel free to share anything you care. Feel free to leave anything you care to share in the comments. And I will say bye for now and see you in the next one.